When I was little, I told people in response to the question of what do you want to be when you grow up, that growing up in teeny tiny rural Nebraska, I wanted to be a doctor during the week and a truck driver on the weekends. I said it with total certainty. There was no hesitation. There was no need to explain. It made perfect sense to me. And it was completely true for who I was at the time. I wasn't worried about whether it sounded crazy or if it didn't make sense to anyone else. In my brain, I thought, I'm going to help people during the week. And if I want to see the world, I will drive truck on the weekends. It's that kind of honesty before the world teaches us to edit ourselves is what I keep coming back to when I think about authenticity. And in this episode, we're exploring what it means to define authenticity beyond the buzzwords and without the pressure to perform. My guest is Dr. Lynn Gangone. She is a powerhouse in higher education leadership and was the president and CEO of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. She spent her career in spaces where women often feel the pressure to sink, to smooth their edges, or to fit someone else's mold. And in our discussion, she shares her journey of unlearning that, of breaking free from the polished image she thought she had to maintain, and of embracing a version of success that feels aligned and energized and true. And we talk about the cost of maintaining a facade and the effort that is required to reclaim your voice, and ultimately how choosing authenticity can transform everything from leadership to life. I'm Marney Andes, and this is the She Lives Intentionally podcast. Okay, Lynn, what did you want to be when you grew up?
President of the United States.
Oh, that could do. That could have just shifted the entire podcast because yes, please, yes.
My father tells that story. When I did my TEDx Mile High talk back in, I don't know, I think it was 2014. I talk about that my dad said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, President of the United States.
I still think you could be President of the United States, by the way.
Well, apparently at 67, I'm young. So
this would be fantastic. I mean, you would be running circles around everyone in there, although you would do that anyway, regardless of age.
I should have added that, I took a class at University of Colorado, Denver called Changemakers for pre-retirees, retirees, and people who have failed at retirement. And, they did have us go through our life story and our values. And I didn't put President of the United States in my 12-week plan, but maybe I need to change it.
There's still time.
There's still time.
Mm-hmm. But what occurred to me when I thought about asking you this question for today was, I think there's a lot of people that think about those things as a child, but very few people, do I hear, end up moving forward with whatever that thing is that they had dreams of growing up to be. And I think you have some threads for sure, without a doubt, but it brings me to my first question. When did you start seeing a gap between what you wanted to be and what the world expected of you?
The first time I saw that gap was in high school. I was a Title IX baby, in that Title IX was passed when I was in junior high and high school. And I became somewhat of an athlete. I started playing softball and then went on to field hockey and tennis. And so girls' sports at the time, you and I are different enough in age that you were able to reap some of the benefits of Title IX when you played basketball. But for me, it was the very beginning. And that's when I saw the gap in what it meant to be authentically a girl and authentically athletic. And it was different then than it is now, I believe. And that was the first moment when I thought, there are some expectations about behaviors for girls and for boys, right? And that some of that then questioned how authentic one could be. That's when it started.
Well, so how did you begin to shape your own definition of authenticity, especially in places that weren't always welcoming?
It took a very long time to shape that. I was managing several identities, if you will, as I was moving through high school and then into college. And I believe in reflection managed a lot of contradictions. So knowing that I enjoyed sports and had friends and certainly coaches that were supportive, but also knowing that in many ways we were the next generation of the pioneers who broke ground for girls' sports and women's sports. My best friend from college received the first athletic scholarship for women at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, right? So it was that period. Also, I ended up attending a Catholic women's college, where on the one hand, we were told as women we could be anything we wanted to be, but on the other hand, some of that was somewhat constricted in terms of expectations of career. What women did at that point in the 1970s, things were just starting to open up, right, for women in terms of careers other than being a nun, a nurse, or a teacher. So there was that part around what does it mean to be authentically pursuing career as a young woman, and then for me also figuring out in high school and college my sexual orientation and learning about how to navigate the world as someone who presented as, to use the language, who presented as straight, but who was not. And how, African American women often, who are my friends, talk to me about code switching, right? Like how they enter into white dominated environments and they change language, they change a whole host of things to code switch to fit into the white world. And, for me, my code switching was always back and forth around, was I authentically presenting myself as someone who was gay, or was I code switching because in the 1970s and the 1980s and the 1990s and maybe even today, it isn't always the easiest thing to be authentically who I am. Although I would say in my 60s now, you kind of get to the point where you say, what the hell? But I digress. So those were specific moments around authenticity. And, I know that for me, and I'm sure many women and men listening to this podcast would agree, you get to a point where you say, I want to be able to wake up in the morning and go to bed at night and feel good about who I am. And it's worth it to me to take the risk to be more authentic because I want to be able to sleep at night knowing that I was not presenting a false persona.
How do we get women in our community like doing that sooner in their life? I don't want to admit that it's taken age for me to get there. I had so many parts of my life, too much of my life, where I was trying to think like, well, how do I fit in there? From everything from like, what should I be wearing to that event versus, it almost becomes a little overwhelming for me right now, thinking, God, I could have done all those things and just been me, but I felt like I had to switch things up. And mine in many ways was switching it up when I knew that the environment was very much male dominated. And how could I show up and be just confident enough that they thought I was cool and they'd listen to me, but not too much.
I think it's really hard, Marnie, to be that authentic. I have been watching lately how popular media is navigating what female is and what male is. And sometimes I feel like I am in a time capsule and I've gone back to the 1950s. There was this montage of women who are part of the current administration of the US government, and with some variation, they all look the same. And there was a, like, I love sheath dresses, and there was an article in the New York Times. How do I wear a sheath dress and not look like I'm part of the current administration? I mean, there's a way in which these themes of masculinity and being emasculated, or femininity, and designer spacesuits for an 11-minute flight. I mean, it's very hard, especially now with all of the images. I mean, I can't even imagine growing up with social media and thinking about how images are presented of what you should say, what you should do, what you should think, what you should teach. I could keep going. It's hard to be authentic. It carries a large price. That price can be economic. You could lose your job. That price could be social. You don't have friends. I mean, there is a reason why we get pushed to be within these gendered, especially, confines. There is. I'll just tell you an anecdote. So I just had my 50-year high school reunion. 50 years. And I decided I didn't want to show up in a dress. Been there, done that. I can pull off a really girly look as good as any of them. But I wanted to wear a pantsuit and a tuxedo shirt and a tie, and I did. And it was awesome. And I felt great. And I was in really fun flats, and I danced all night. And I thought, look at me. What are you going to say to me now?
I feel that. I mean, I wrote it a while back. I finally had decided not that I won't ever wear a pair of heels again, but it just feels awkward to me. Like, I never actually felt comfortable with them. And I know that that's funny for people to hear, considering that I decided to compete in a beauty pageant at one point in my life. But that was a costume to me. That wasn't an identity. It was like, oh, well, it's just like if a triathlete has to wear certain clothing to compete, I knew I had to wear a pair of heels and a swimsuit and an evening gown. I mean, like, it wasn't because that was me. It was like that was part of the attire.
I never thought about it that way. That's great.
I need to be wearing tennis shoes, one, for my physical well-being, because God knows I don't need to be walking around in heels. But it just felt like me. And it's like, once you own that, even the smallest events, if I walk in and it's a room full of women that are wearing dresses and heels, and suddenly I'm like, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to be pantsuit and tennis shoes. But now I'm at the place I don't care. But to your point, like growing up,
I would never have done that. Never. Never. It took me to 67 to do that.
right.
That's the
Right.
first event I ever went to in essentially a suit and a tie. I would have never done that before. It would have been too risky. It would have been too revelatory. I don't know why. I mean, but it shows you the power of fashion, right? It shows you the power of, so being authentic, anyone who works to be authentic, and it is work, bumps up against daily, weekly, centuries worth of, this is what you follow, this path. This is what you're supposed to do. You always say in She Lives Intentionally, get rid of the shoulds. I think the opposite of authenticity is all the shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
I should do this. I should do that. There are lots of shoulds.
Right. Well, I want to dig into this part that you already shared a little bit about, and just bring in some of the research, because that's part of what honestly got me going with She Lives Intentionally, was starting to look into some of this stuff of like, okay, is that stuff we've crafted? Is it stuff that was crafted for us? Is there a combination of that being internalized and so forth? But for our discussion today, found a 2021 study from the Journal of Vocational Behavior that found that women from marginalized groups, including LGBTQ plus women, often face additional challenges expressing authenticity at work. So how has your identity shaped your journey toward defining authenticity?
It is different when you carry a part of yourself that is quite different from the mainstream, right? For some people, African American women, Asian women, Latinas, they have visible difference by virtue of skin color. Some of us don't have visible difference unless we choose to also express. So if you're gay or lesbian, you could choose to express a different gender identity, right? So I always present it as very quote unquote female. So I didn't necessarily have to worry about that part. But it was, and still is, a space of constant negotiation. I don't think there's ever a moment where I don't think about how something I say or do may be more revelatory than I'm prepared to manage. Right? So that kind of goes back to that study around, people with difference. So, another piece of research, if we're going to go down this path, and I love it because, I've been a researcher in my life, is a study that was done that's actually quite affirming. So we kind of went on the first thing, which is, yes, if you have something that is different than the mainstream, your experience in the work environment changes. Dr. Deborah Meyerson from Stanford University, did a study that came out of her experience as a woman at the Stanford Business School. And so the book she's written is called Rocking the Boat. And it's about how to affect change without making trouble. So what Dr. Meyerson did, and it's this great book, I would highly recommend it. It is really has been a bellwether for me in terms of thinking about difference and change, right? So she wrote her initial book in 2001 and her second edition in 2008. It seems, wow, could something that dated, if you will, still be relevant? Absolutely, right? So she writes about this notion. So rocking the boat is, you want to rock the boat, but you want to stay in the boat. You see through the lens of your difference how an organization could be more authentic. An organization could be more welcoming. So you are working and you are one of the others. You are someone who is not in the majority, and however that's defined. And so what Deborah did was she did extensive interviews with several corporations, hundreds of people, and looked at how individuals inside of organizations created change by virtue of asserting their identity, sometimes in ways that were not considered. Sometimes they were soft, sometimes they were a little pushy, right? But they read their environments and they thought about, how they could change. So one of the things she says in her book is that social change occurs through the combination of bold top-down initiatives, entrepreneurial innovations, radical campaigns and movements, and grassroots incremental efforts from within traditional institutions, right? So change happens through a variety of different ways. So I have been a president, I've been a positional leader. I can create change because I have positional leadership power. I've also been someone who, as I was coming up the ranks, didn't have that. So how did I choose to rock the boat, right? Without having that positional leadership. And so those are the kinds of things that, she has documented for all of us to look at, to say, we can affect change within our organization, despite where we might sit with positional power. And it's kind of cool. And she's done all this research. I mean, it's a great book. I'd highly recommend reading it. And I'm actually talking to her next week because I've been so fascinated by her research. And the term she uses is tempered radical. Tempered radical.
I think that's great that you're going to end up meeting with her, talking more about it. I'm glad you brought it up too, because I think about the work that I've done in organizations, having either been in them or consulting outside in type thing, is that this notion of authentic leadership and be that authentic leader. And I think about the challenges, just even what you brought up, the challenges of doing that, but also the reward of doing that, and why we need everyone to step into that in order to make things better. If we're all conforming to whatever the system has already set into motion, if the system's already not working that well, then all we're doing is perpetuating it. I think that's an easy thing to say, very difficult to do. But, I think about just those challenges and whether you talk about the work aspect of it or your personal life, I think about that. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced living authentically in both your personal and professional life?
Well, I'm going to give you an anecdote from early in my career, and it is an anecdote of irony. Okay. So when I was in my early to late 20s, I worked for several grant-funded projects that were around vocational equity. So what does that mean? It means that during this time in the 80s, we were trying to get more men to consider non-traditional careers. So for men, that would be nursing. It would actually be teaching, right? Versus women who we were trying to get them to get into drafting and air conditioning, HVAC, all that, right? So I worked for this project, and the head of the organization knew that I was gay, and it was okay as long as I didn't really talk about it, right? But we're in this, we're in this space where we're like, girls can do these things and boys can do things, and women can do these things and men can do these things. So this was the 80s, and I guess a lot of women weren't riding motorcycles then, but I had a motorcycle, and I decided, because the local high school had asked us to come in and do a talk to the students about, non-traditional careers, I decided, since the high school was down the street from where I lived, to ride my motorcycle to the event. And I rode the motorcycle, and the students saw me, and they were like, wow, that's really cool. And they had all kinds of questions, and just got them thinking differently, right? My boss found out that I had ridden a motorcycle to this event, and she reamed me out and said that I was unprofessional. That was code for, you showed up in a way, right, that questioned who you were in the world because you were a woman on a motorcycle as opposed to showing up in a car. And I thought, this is really interesting, right? You're working for a project that's questioning gendered expectations in career, but you have a problem when one of your staff members questions the gendered expectations of transportation. And so there are all these little things, and some of them weren't. There was another time, this was fun, when I presented as single, okay? This was in the early 1990s. I was partnered. I was in what would have been a 12-year relationship. I was partnered, but I wasn't, quote unquote, out. And so I was being heavily recruited for a job at a association in a state on the East Coast. And the individual who ran the organization really wanted me, and so upped the offer on my salary by $10,000. The person who made that offer was a woman. The chair of the board was a man who said to the woman, "What is a single woman going to do with all that money?" This was in, the early 90s. So, so your question is, so what do you do when you're faced with, showing up? I mean, I was showing up as my authentic self. I had gotten a doctoral degree. I had, I had all the cred to deserve that extra $10,000. And yeah. And then later on, 4 years later, when I was asked to run for the presidency of that organization. So by this time, it's like, oh, wait, that wasn't 1991. That was 2001. And in 2004, I didn't get the job as president because I decided to tell the chair of the board about my sexual orientation because I didn't want them to be blindsided. And several members of the board decided that if anyone knew about my sexual orientation, it might compromise their funding. And I didn't get the job. This was in 2004. So when you talk about, right, the price of being authentic, I mean, I could probably put it for you into dollars and cents. I have more of these anecdotes that go up until 2022.
Yeah.
So what do? Right? I think it's really important. I think it's really important that you're willing to go the extra mile to be who you are authentically. I think it's really important. And I think it's even more important right now because there's a lot of pressure right now for us to conform, for us to not acknowledge difference as though that's going to bring harm to someone. And so I'm glad I'm where I'm at because I'm pretty clear about who I am. But I've never, for example, put in any bio until I retired that I have a spouse who's a woman. Whereas, you read bios and they say, oh, and Kathy and her husband, Joe, have 3 children and are active in their community. I never put anything personal in my professional bio. And now I'm starting to do it. But look at how old I am. You just, it's what you're willing to manage or not on any given day. Yeah, I hope I don't sound depressing. I mean, I'm
No,
really happy about the decisions I've made along the way, but I tell those stories because they're real.
right. Absolutely, they're real. I mean, every time you were sharing something, like it just got me thinking of more questions. Or, well, how would have that same situation played out for me as I was growing up, or as I was in my first role? Because, like the first thing I thought about, well, first of all, it's cool that you own a motorcycle, because I always wanted a motorcycle. And I had, at one point, my freshman year of college, I told my dad that I wanted a Ducati. Wasn't that
Yeah.
like the, okay.
Yeah.
And he was like, what are you going to do when it snows? But I was like, I'm going to trade in my car because I want this motorcycle. And I was thinking, as you were telling that story, I was like, is part of it because she knew you were a gay woman?
Yes.
Would have I been treated the same had I showed up and it was just because I was just showing up on a motorcycle that no one knew I owned?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I suspect
Yeah.
that it was a red flag around sexual orientation. Yeah.
And to go to your place of like, is it depressing? I think that's part of what the piece of these conversations is all about, and so much of why we talk about the shoulds, and maybe that was sort of like the door opening to me as starting this community, was it was for me personally, as I started to see certain things, like, oh God. It's like, once you see it, it's like the car accident you can't walk away from, or it's like the embarrassing actor on the show that you're like, oh my God, I just can't even watch, but I have to watch. It's like, once you see it, you're like, oh my God, that's going on, right? And I think about so many people that don't see it at all because they're programmed almost perfectly, which is what the system has been designed to do, which is like, this is your role and this is your role and this is how we're supposed to operate and this is how everybody feels comfortable and everybody. And for me, it's like, well, it is depressing. I mean, each theme we uncover, you're like, oh shit, like we've been told to act this certain way, and that's how we're supposed to be. And anything that goes outside of that is really uncomfortable for people. And then it's like, well, are you okay with making other people uncomfortable so that you can actually be comfortable in your own skin? I mean, that's just for this discussion, right? But I also think awareness is so powerful. So, like I've said, there's some people that will go their whole lives and they'll not even be aware that this system was at work. All right, fine. But for the people that are like, I actually want to do something about it, or that isn't who I really am, and I do want to be who I am, and maybe part of it's even figuring out who the hell I really am, means you have to start by saying, I know that exists. I see it now. Yes. And not just for me, I see it as now from my friend's perspective, who is a gay woman. Now I'm like, holy shit, I knew you were navigating that stuff, but every time we talk about it, it's like, yeah, like of course that was a challenge. Then of course you didn't put personal stuff on your bio for fear of how you might be judged or not hired, or the list goes on and on, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It does. I wouldn't have it any other way in terms of how I've chosen to be I love Deborah Myerson's work because I resonated with it when I first read it. I resonated with it from a personal, professional, and leadership perspective that and used her work in the leadership development work that I have done and the coaching I have done. The idea that our difference can be amplified for good is a strong message. And it does come out of deficit, right? It comes out of, oh, geez, I mean, for Deborah, it came out of, I'm a woman in this, business school, and I'm one of the few. And there's a different way that I can see that I'm being treated, or that my perspective is maybe not as valued as my colleagues who are male. Right. And that starts it, right? That's that, we have talked about, it's an overused term, but it's important. The aha moment, the moment when you say, wait a minute, this is who I am. How is it possible that this door didn't open for me? How is it possible that this reaction, you have that moment, and then you do start, if you're brave enough, you do start to ask the question, where else is this happening? And for whom? That's why we talk a lot about, men with daughters typically are, and I'm sure this happened with you and your dad, because I know how much you and your dad loved one another, and the lessons he taught you, you wrote about it, right? But there's that moment with a dad who has a daughter who says, I want my daughter to be president of the United States. So we need to do something about this, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I had this moment in my class, in my change makers class. We had pre-happy hour, pre-class happy hour, not a pre-happy hour to a happy hour, pre-class happy hour. And the observation from some of the guys in the class was that a lot of the speakers were women. And I said, wait a minute. And then they all looked at me and they're like, uh-oh. And I said, why is it that we can look at a group of corporate leaders who are all male and never ask the question, where's anyone who's different? But the minute we have a lot of women or a lot of Black people or a lot of whomever, we're like, oh, where are the guys? It's like, you're right, Lynn. I never thought about it that way. Very hard to get people for whom there are so many assumptions about their place in the world. Hard for them to think differently about that.
Well, the system's at work. Mm-hmm. The system's at work when that's happening, for sure. And I know you talk a lot about that. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, this could literally be an all-day discussion, which I'm always eager to have discussions.
You may listen to this and want to do it over. So just
oh my God, are you kidding me? There's just like so much. I'm like, I'm going to take us on a crazy tangent here, but first of all, everything that you've shared, even if I haven't been in those exact situations, I know I've been in enough situations that I changed something because I thought it would better position me in places. Meaning, I talked about this before when I was consulting early on, like the consulting time 2 times ago, when I was doing actually a lot of tech stuff, because that's what my master's was in. At the time, I was very techie and I knew exactly how to talk with the clients, but then also had this great group that I worked with that could do all the stuff and then help everybody make the connection. That was where my power was. But I remember even being so conscious about not just what I wore, because I know we talked about that already, but it was even how I kind of presented myself. So when I walked into the all guys club, well, let me pull this lever. Former athlete, boom. Okay, we're gonna have some sports stuff going on here because that's gonna make them comfortable. And then kind of depending on where this mood goes. Oh yeah, I worked for my dad on the farm. Boom, pulling that lever. It's like, but, and yes, those things were all me. So I still go like, that was authentically showing up, because it wasn't that those things weren't true. It was just, I knew what things to be putting in the room space. And part of it, I think about like writing in my book, it was like, know the rules of the game, right? It's like, where are you playing and how do you do that? And that's not to conform. It's more to like be aware of what's going on. So you know how you can influence, right? But, I think about someone who's maybe in the fog. Like, I see it from different perspectives now, which has been really interesting. I see it now looking back of where I changed, and it wouldn't have mattered. I could have just been who I really wanted to be in that situation, looking back on some of those. And in some, maybe I'm like, nah, maybe that did play to my benefit. Now I'm seeing another side of it. I have a situation where actually being a woman, I do want to play into. And you and I have talked about this, and we're not going to go a long conversation around this, but it's interesting because I just came back for my first basketball officials camp.
Oh.
And, knowing walking in, I know I'm going to walk into maybe a few other women at the camp. I think there was probably 6 of us out of, 70 people that were there. I'm going back for more this weekend because I need more practice. But I have realized this is from a different thing. It's not me trying to act like a man, where some cases I felt compelled to do that. This I'm actually finding in this community, they want more women that are officiating, because guess what? Girls play basketball too, So they've actually at least progressed to that place of it. So me trying to fit in with the guys actually is such a thing that I don't want to, that it's like, no, I'm going to look like a strong female that I want to come in looking like. And that plays, but it's so funny because you could be really confused in that environment too and think, well, I got to show up looking like everybody else. And that's not necessarily the case. And so that is going to be my maybe transition to get us to a place to talk about 2 things. And I'm not going to give them both to you because I want to go through both of them. What advice do you give to somebody who's still trying to figure out their authentic voice or their authentic presence?
I don't presume to give advice. I can talk about a couple things that, a couple ways I did. I think that knowing yourself is important, and somehow having the space to get to know yourself. Right. So depends on for some people that's journaling. For some people that's talking to friends. For some people that's meditation or prayer. But whatever gets you to a place where you have a sense of your values, your core, like who you are, who you want to be in the world. I mean, you just need to allow yourself the time to reflect. It isn't easy in a busy world. But that's really important.
I see that even with this community. If you can find the community, the group that even in your, I'll just even say day to day, whether it be your work or your personal environment, whether that be family or your network of friends or whatnot, if it's not conducive to being able to explore that, then find a community that would allow you to do that.
Absolutely.
That's super important, because I think the more you live not having the space to explore it or feeling like you can't talk to anybody about it, the more then either you just succumb to it or, who knows what comes of that. But I think finding that right place where you're like, well, people aren't necessarily they're not going to judge me around this. They're all kind of trying to do this work too. So where do I go? Who do I find to be able to do that with?
You have to start with yourself and then finding that community. Absolutely. The other thing that I think of is what is my responsibility to make this world a better place for those who are following? And, for some people, that's the parent-child relationship, right? Like, I want to make sure my child has opportunity. I want to make sure I think a lot of what it would have meant to me to have had someone in front of me when I was younger say, and, my spouse, and then say her name, and what that would have meant to me to hear that, how affirming that would be to hear that, right? So I think if I have the economic and positional privilege to take that risk, I want to do that because I have a responsibility to those who are following.
Mm-hmm.
And, so for moms thinking about what is my responsibility, right, to the next generation, to my children? What are things that have happened to me in my life that I would want changed? There was a great cartoon around Mother's Day that I saw on one of the social media platforms. And essentially it was this one young woman saying to another young woman, what my mother would want for Mother's Day would be for us to continue to fight for the rights that she fought for.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, so when we do these things, we don't do them always selfishly. We do them because we want the next generation to have the opportunity that maybe we didn't have. And I think it's important to have that level of, is it altruism, or I think it's important.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I actually shared that with my boys. I know I read this somewhere. I can't claim that this was something that I thought up on my own, but I had shared with them, and I don't even know what discussion we were getting into, but I said, you have to understand, I believe that I don't owe it to the generation who raised me to make them proud and do the things and learn all the things. I owe it to you, and you will owe it to the generation behind you. And I think part of it was coming up because it was, what do they do? And, are they making us proud, or all these things? And yes, I understand those discussions. You want affirmation, you want us to support you and so forth. But I said, that's going to happen anyway, because I chose to bring you into this world, but you don't owe me what you think I want you to be. You owe it to yourself, and you owe it to those who are following to do those things, because they have to see it happening in front of them too. So I totally agree with you, but I think that is important. I think so much of how we might hold on to stuff that's not authentic to us is because we somehow, whether it's conscious or unconsciously, are playing into what we think somebody would be more happy with us about, or more accepting of us about. Mm-hmm. And that's not the role. Again, a lot of these things are easier said than necessarily living through or navigating. But I want to at least ask you this question around just the authenticity piece before we go into some of the closing questions. But if you had to describe your mindset around how you stay authentic and show up authentically, even when presented in times where this could be hard, or I guess just describe for me your mindset around doing that, because I think that could be helpful for people too.
I see myself as an educator in many, many ways. And one of the ways that I step into my authentic self is about education. It educates people. It is. I mean, when I claim the whole of who I am, it's powerful and important. And I feel a deep obligation to do so. I just do. I don't know how else to describe it. So my mindset is every interaction, every opportunity is important. The marriage equality movement came about in many ways with gay, lesbian individuals being known. And also because of this phenomena we have called the movable middle. There are people always at one end of the spectrum or the other, and then there's the movable middle. My 90-year-old mother is evidence of that, right? The woman who, when I was in high school and college, could not accept the fact that she had raised a gay daughter, who now, on the cusp of 90, says to her nurse, "This is my daughter and this is her wife," and has our wedding picture sitting right where everyone can see it, right? That's the movable middle. Those are the people who, because of the relationships that we have, understand and appreciate that, as human beings, really, we all want the same things. We want to be happy, healthy. We want to be in community. We want to have families. We're not that different from one another. I always remind people, we have some ridiculous amount, 95, 97% of all human beings share the same DNA. It's like these little tweaks that make us different. And yet we get so bogged down in creating the other as opposed to being in relationship to. And so that's what I mean by an obligation. I feel very obligated to always be the person who can take the risk so that maybe someone else doesn't have to.
The mindset piece of maybe that's the ask of everyone is, well, what do you naturally get drawn to? For you, I love the fact that you said I'm an educator. So when I think about every interaction, how am I educating people? And it's going to make me think about what does that look like for me? Because I have similarities around that, having been a teacher myself. And I think about, this environment too. Well, if you have that as your mindset of whatever that thing is for you, maybe it's the creative piece of you as an individual, and you're thinking, okay, well, if my thing is all about my creativity, then how do I show up authentically in all those interactions and bring creativity to it? So that's something for everyone to walk away with, to go, what's at the core of who I am? How do I bring that mindset in order to be the central piece of showing up authentically, or the way in which I'm able to not get so sidetracked? I'm glad you shared that. And the fact that you think about having the obligation around it. So much of authenticity is the willingness and the courage to show up so other people can observe. I want to transition into the closing questions that I ask every guest. The first of the questions is, what does living intentionally look like in this season of your life?
It is the most awesome thing in the whole wide world. It is really cool. I retired about 8 or 9 months ago, and I'm just having a blast. It is to be intentional and authentic. It's such a gift. I know we talk about, do you have to really wait till you're older, but I don't know. I'm loving every minute of it.
What's one shift, big or small, that helped you live more true to yourself?
My marriage. I have this amazing spouse who grounds me and has helped me become more steady and grounded, and that has helped me become a lot more authentic. I feel really blessed that later in my life, I was actually able to legally marry. I never thought I'd have that opportunity. And B, that I have found someone who's so amazing. And it's such a gift.
Well, having spent time with Natasha, I definitely know that that's the case. So last one.
I just have to say, and then at my high school reunion, all my friends, 50 years later, oh my God, she's so beautiful. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't expect me to be with someone who wasn't, did you?
Right. Come on.
But boy, it's a far cry between 1974, 75 and 2004, 24, 25. Anyway, yes, she's beautiful. Okay, last question.
Last question. What's one thing you've learned about life that you would want every woman to know?
It's totally worth the risk. Whatever that risk is, it's totally worth it.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Marnie. It's always fun to be in conversation with you, and thank you for leading us all to live more intentionally.
Oh, you are welcome. I always love having conversations with you. If something here stirred something in you, don't let it sit. You can learn more at shelivesintentionally.com.